Hello everyone and welcome to Keen on Yoga. It's great to be here again and have the opportunity to talk to you in a solo podcast. I know that at the start I really felt very insecure, very underconfident about talking on my own, and therefore, well, I think I tended to talk too much when I was on the guest podcast, which isn't really appropriate because obviously you want to hear from them then and well, maybe me now. And I really appreciate all your positive words about my podcast here because it's been really quite a baptism of fire to speak on my own like this in front of, well, a potential audience, because obviously I'm here right now in my kitchen in Sarajevo, Bosnia, on my own with you potentially listening. So it's a really weird, surreal experience if you've ever done anything like this. Well, it has its pluses and minuses, but I was going to say it's much easier talking to a real life audience because at least you can see how your points are being received. And today's no different really, because I'm going to talk on the difficult and somewhat contentious subject of modern yoga. What is modern yoga, and how does it differ to pre-modern yoga, or well, what do I mean in the first place when I say modern yoga? Well, I suppose it comes from the term modern postural yoga, and it was Elizabeth D. Michaelis in her excellent book, which is really the kind of stepping stone. If you haven't looked at Elizabeth D. Michaelis' book, can't remember the title of it now. That's really annoying, but something. Oh no, sorry. You're going to have to find it yourself. Elizabeth D. Michaelis, and she was the first person to really kick off this idea that there is such a thing as a modern yoga, rather than just a yoga that's gone on for thousands of years, which at least was my understanding of it when I got into it. That what we're doing now is thousands of years old, and if I was inclined to look at the right scriptures, I would find a detailed history of what she called modern postural yoga. But no, it is a new thing, and when I say modern yoga or modern postural yoga, I think that sounds rather Western, because really no yoga and yoga asana is not a new thing. It's just the modern postural yoga, or the modern yoga, really denotes a particular focus or interest on asana. A particular focus and interest on asana. And that happens let's say modern yoga starts really at the beginning of the period of modernism, really, at the start of the 20th century, with someone called Sri Yogendra, who's teaching in a suburb of Mumbai, and he's the first kind of person that did an asana class, that gave an asana yoga class on its own with no context around it, in 1918. Did I say that? And that was in a suburb called, where was it? I can't remember the suburb of Mumbai, a beachfront suburb. Someone will know again. Not doing very well today on my memory. Anyways, so he was the first person in 1918, and so it's actually a long time before Krishnamacharya came along in 1934 and started teaching asana-based yoga. But so that's what I would say. A modern yoga starts at the 20th century and is defined by a real, I would say, almost an exclusive interest in yoga asana. Yeah, and of course, many people get irritated when we talk about yoga in the first place. Well, what do you mean yoga? What method of yoga? What part of yoga? And of course, they know what we mean when we say yoga. We mean yoga asana, and that is modern yoga defined by a particular emphasis or interest on yoga asana. Yeah, over and above everything else, which is not unusual per se. I mean, asana has of course been used over history in the yoga tradition. I mean, it's been used probably from time immemorial, really, as much as we've used the body in certain positions to affect changes of our consciousness in all countries. And probably this has been recorded in India more than anywhere else, but I believe that we've done it, we've had our own form of working with the body to affect changes in the consciousness for a deeper understanding of our existence. Yep, in all places, and this happens to have a particular rooting in India, and you could probably see it in the Pashupati seal, over 2,500 BCE, in the Indus Valley civilization. It looks like something to do with yoga there, an asana, and you can certainly see it in the postures of the Shramanas, who hung upside down by their legs like the bat pedants, or even today in the modern sadhus sitting down surrounded by fires, which is the Dhuni penance, in the heat of the day, sitting surrounded by many fires and doing mantra. Also a seated asana, right? The use of asana as a penance in that case, the use of asana as a meditation position, possibly suggested by the Pashupati seal, certainly seemed to be suggested by Patanjali, who was around 200 BCE to 400 CE, so a long time ago we're talking about asana being used and recorded, no doubt. And then in the ideas of the tantrics about raising kundalini, those tantrics that were probably writing around 600 CE, we find the first tantric text, I believe, again correct me if I'm wrong, of raising energy up through the spine, or there's another model which raises the apana up towards the centre and the prana down from the head to meet in the middle. Anyway, there's different, just to say, there's different ways of envisaging that energetics of the tantrics, but certainly asanas were used in that as well for the sake of preparing the body, really, because and also sitting in a certain asana for a period of time to work with the breathing. But they weren't the asanas we know today. They weren't the asanas that Krishnamacharya did. They weren't the asanas that Sri Iyengar did. These were simple asanas generally to work with the deeper energy of kundalini, of really pressurizing the Sushumna Nadi, the central channel. So, yes, asana has been used for ages, no doubt. But modern yoga, as opposed to pre-20th century yoga, prioritizes the use of asana almost exclusively, as if it's a practice in and of itself. Whereas previously, and this is a subtle point, but an important one, previously the use of asana isn't really a practice. Rather, asana is used as an auxiliary practice, meaning doing something for the sake of something else. So you would do asana to help before meditation, you do asana to help calm the mind as a penance, again perhaps before meditation, you do asana perhaps more rigorously before sitting in a few asanas and doing pranayama for the sake of raising kundalini. You might even do asanas to settle yourself down before doing religious rites, rituals and puja. But it was always a subsidiary or auxiliary practice to the main event. It wasn't the main event. It wasn't a practice done for its own innate value, in and of itself really, asana practice, as the spiritual practice. Do you see the difference? So, or another way we could envisage this is that asana was one spoke of a wheel, and probably the centre of the wheel was contemplation, meditation. And now, the genius of, the innovation of Krishnamacharya and others is to put the asana as rather from a spoke on the wheel to the hub of the wheel, to the centre of the wheel. So that's modern yoga, is to say, well, instead of asana being, fairly fringe, let's say, fairly fringe, it now becomes the centre of the practice. And even this idea, promoted by Sri Yogendra, Kavalyananda of Kavalyadam Ashram, and Krishnamacharya, of course, Sri T. Krishnamacharya, that you could do the other things within the practice of asana. In other words, you could do the contemplation within asana. You could use asana to steady yourself to such a degree that your yamas and niyamas would be a practice that was helped by asana. You could do pranayama in asana. You could do concentration, dharana, in asana. Perhaps you could even do samadhi in asana. And B.K.S. Iyengar, of course, promoted the idea of asana as almost as a one-stop shop that you could do, that asana could lead to the whole experience of yoga, that all Patanjali's limbs, as it were, because Patanjali over the ages has always been a somewhat credible model for yoga, right? The idea that you could do all Patanjali's limbs within asana. So modern yoga is just an inordinate value, an inordinate added value to asana, to add to particularly to asana, I would say, and for good or for bad, that is where we're at. And I don't think it's necessarily. Of course, you could say, well, there's more to yoga than just asana, and of course there is. But the reason we're here is probably because that idea of our bodies and moving our bodies and a practice that's shorn of any other religious accoutrements, let's say, any other cultural baggage, any complex and difficult methodological ideas that take long periods of time to grasp, isn't there. So the fact that we have this yoga endemically across the world, it stands for something. It stands for some kind of introspection, right? It might not stand for the whole picture, might not get us there completely. Modern yoga isn't necessarily a pejorative term, is what I'm saying. It's not necessarily a swear word. To say modern yoga is to say it's something which is a democratic. It's accessible to everyone. It's something that we all can immediately do without committing our whole lives and living in a cave to do yoga, yeah? Or being one of the select few chosen by the guru to do yoga. Now everyone can do it. Everyone can walk in a class and get a little taster of a deeper experience of their own selves. So yes, it's shorn of other things. It hasn't got the context around it that pre-modern yoga does. Indeed. But to that end, its popularity resides. And you could say, well, I mean, the other argument against it, of course, there's always two sides of a coin, right? You could say, well, therefore, better not do it at all, because, well, if we can't do yoga properly as it's meant to be, with all the context around our asana practice, then, it's just jumping around on a mat. Well, yes and no, because you've got the focus of the breath, and pretty much any teacher is going to focus on the breath, even if they've done their YTT at 200 hours last week and they're teaching in the local gym. They understand that there's something to do with the breathing and correlating that to the movement. They understand that there's meant to be some inner focus. The postures themselves are energetic, like they all focus energy towards the center of the spine. I mean, you can't really avoid that in terms of the flexion and the extension of the spine. Yeah, it's very different to gym work, where you hardly ever use your spine. If you do, actually, you should brace it. You should keep the spine rigid. Well, yoga is stimulating the spine all the time, and therefore stimulating the nerves around the spine that connect to the brain. So you can't really avoid it. Yep. So before we go any further, should I say, we shouldn't be down on modern yoga, even though it isn't the whole story, even though perhaps it lacks context, and to that end it might lack depth. It's a way in, it's accessible, it's democratic, it suits the modern age, it's dynamic to suit modernity, the period of modernity after all, defined by movement. Yeah, modernity is defined by dynamic, strong movement. And here we suddenly have asana as a symbol of modernity, right? But also a symbol of our spiritual interest, I think. Yeah. The fact that we are interested in asana at all suggests that we are interested in more than simply a gym workout, right? Otherwise we could do that. Otherwise, what was wrong with the Reebok step workouts or I'm trying to think of some popular aerobics workout person, there's been many of them over the years. Do you know what I mean? Or gym, why don't we just go to the gym? But we don't. We do a yoga class because we all have the longing for something more. We all have the longing for a deeper connection to our own being. Hence we're there. And you don't need all the information to get that connection. You don't need to read all the text. That's the whole point in the first place with the guru-shishya relationship that defines yoga, the guru-disciple relationship defined by the carrying over of a perspective, of an energy. It's not knowledge that we need more of. In fact, that's seen as an obstacle traditionally to yoga. Knowledge is seen as an obstacle to samadhi, to understanding, to liberation. Okay? So perhaps we don't need that. Anyways, let's look at how it develops. Let's look at how modern yoga develops, because what I worry about, however, is this democracy, that I see as a very democratic and accessible movement that gives people an opportunity as a way in. And then, listen, once you start doing yoga, and you start feeling a little bit of a twinkle about your inner being, some kind of connection to your body and to yourself in a meaningful way, in a deep and meaningful way. And I think everyone's had that in yoga classes that stuck with it at all, has had some kind of inclination that there's something there that's worthwhile, and that's new and that's different and that's very different to gym or rock climbing or running or anything else they've done before. Certainly I did. Yeah. But that democracy is somewhat I feel it's somewhat in danger. I feel it's somewhat under threat of modern yoga being ensconced again in an idealistic and rigid kind of narrative. The yoga should be done this way, otherwise it's not yoga. And oftentimes it's around the figure of Krishnamacharya. That this is the legacy of Krishnamacharya. This is the tradition of Krishnamacharya. This is what yoga means. And if you're not doing that, or if you don't think that's what yoga means, or if you don't know that's what yoga means, then, well, too bad you're not doing yoga. You may as well just count yourself as doing some newfangled Western appropriative gym class. Well, I don't agree. The whole point of yoga is that it's a freeing for the individual, it's empowering for the individual, and to that end, this whole narrative that to be traditional and authentic as a yoga student, you have to know where this comes from. Very pious. It's like, well, you know what? Yoga has always been an evolution, and it's always presented a doorway in towards the self. Yep. Now, it's done that in many ways over the ages. It could be done in, looking back over the ages in India. Yeah. We can see the method of yoga being all kinds of things. People are doing all kinds of things to try and find a doorway in. Yeah. From standing on one leg to holding a hand up in the air as their yoga practice, to refusing to speak, yeah, to lying down and not getting up. Yeah, anything almost you could imagine has been done in the sake of yoga, which means a certain resistance to the fickleness of the mind, creating a certain stubborn resistance to the mind's tendency to go all over the place all the time. So then you can take back a sense of self-control. So the methods are simple. The methods are, in a certain sense, they don't need any religious extra baggage around them, particularly unless you're interested in that, in that way of approaching yoga, right? They don't need that. But yet, I feel that there's this certain narrative that says, well, the yoga must be done in this way, otherwise it's not yoga. And you are not really, how would you say, you are not really entrusted with your own yoga practice if you're not doing it in that way, right? You have to do it from this teacher within the lineage of Krishnamacharya, or, topical these days, in the lineage of Ashtanga yoga, right? The energy transmission, or whatever that stands for, that doesn't appreciate that, well, the yoga is, I think, should be immediately accessible to the individual. Anyway, so to that end, I wanted a brief look at the roots of modern yoga, just to show that it's a tradition and evolution, and to show, not to disprove the validity that yoga is a time-old tradition, but rather to show that the roots have always been influenced in different ways to present yoga in different ways, and that we're here now with a practice that, well, it has its roots in asana, thousands of years old, sure, but it's also incredibly new, incredibly innovative at the same time, which doesn't decry, it doesn't negate the fact that that asana is still valid as a practice. And of course, you don't need me to tell you that. You're here listening to this because, well, in your own experiential world, asana has been valid as a practice for you. It's been beneficial, and you feel that there's something there to explore and to carry on doing it, because you might go further in it. So let's look at the roots quickly, otherwise I'll get carried away with that. So, what was that? Well, how did it develop? Well, I mentioned Sri Yogendra in the suburb of Mumbai. That slipped my mind right now, the name of which has slipped my mind. I want to say Lonavala again, but that's where Kaivalyananda, the other three-pronged attack of modern yoga, as it were, resided. Sri Swami Kaivalyananda was the instigator, creator of the Kaivalyadam ashram in a little village outside Mumbai called Lonavala. And he was the other modern yoga exponent, really, someone who promoted asana as a practice, as a valid practice that you could do that would give you a physical health to the body, yeah, but would also be related to something in terms of changing one's mindset for the better. Yeah, same with Sri Yogendra. Yeah, and not to say that they didn't recommend other practices as well, such as pranayama, meditation, but particularly there was this focus on asana, and particularly the fact that anyone could now do asana. You didn't need to stand on one leg in front of your guru to be accepted for years. You didn't need a lengthy resume of accreditations to be accepted. You could come and take a yoga class. Yep. Just drop into a class on the beach with Sri Yogendra, or go to Kaivalyanam ashram and learn from one of his teachers asanas. Yep. So there was this great focus on the asana and the value of the asana in and of themselves, yeah? And not just therapeutically, not just physically, but as a tool for further spiritual understanding, let's say. And the third one of these three-pronged attacks, let's say, what do they call them? My mind's failing me today. The three musketeers, the three knights of modern yoga, yeah, Sri Iyengar, Swami Kaivalyananda, and T, I think, Krishnamacharya. And Krishnamacharya is probably the most interesting of the three for us, perhaps, because the Krishnamacharya somehow really caught the imagination for modern yoga in his dynamic presentation at the Mysore Palace. The dynamic, spectacular asanas performed by a troupe of young boys. And it caught, I think at the time, which the time period we're talking about is pretty fairly accurately 1934 to 1947 or 8. And it certainly would have finished after partition, I'm sure. But so it's not long. That's what we're saying. I mean, roughly a 10-year period, really. Yeah. But it really seemed to catch the imagination of people. One, because the Maharaj of Mysore promoted it. Yeah. He was behind these asana displays that Krishnamacharya was asked to put on. Yeah. And two, I think Krishnamacharya did a good job at them. Yeah. He attracted the interest of even Vanity Fair, came with a photographer from the US to do a write-up on Krishnamacharya's yoga demonstrations. So they did have some international exposure as well as pan-India exposure. Yeah. And yeah, these demonstrations were modern. They were just asana. There was no extra context around them as far as I can understand. And in as much as talking to, it's not me, but Andrew Epler often mentioned in his Traditions of the Mysore Palace, he's quite friendly with T.K. Sharma, Dr. Sharma. And Dr. Sharma was there. He was one of the boys. He's still alive. And he said to Andrew Epler, we didn't do anything in terms of yoga method other than the asanas. Yeah. I think he was slightly dismissive in a way of his time at the Mysore Palace even. That's what I picked up, in as much as, yes, certainly Krishnamacharya did just teach the asana to them. And that's the roots of our own modern asana, because, of course, these two foremost disciples, Patabi Joyce, B.K.S. Iyengar, then went off and spread this much later. Interestingly, there was quite a big gap, right? I don't know. I think yoga suddenly, obviously because of the political turmoil in India, probably fell out of the public focus between 47 and 1970, really. There was enough going on. And then suddenly in 1970, it springs up in the West through these two disciples, B.K.S. Iyengar and Patabi Joyce. Obviously, Patabi Joyce received students in Mysore. And B.K.S. Iyengar went to the West, invited by Yehudi Menuhin, a famous violinist. And he was going to the Swiss Alps, to a very, very kind of posh clientele in the Swiss Alps, along with Krishnamurti, interestingly enough. So I think that B.K.S. Iyengar owes a great deal of the way he frames yoga, the way that B.K.S. frames his idea of asana. It definitely borrows from ideas from Krishnamurti, who he spent a lot of time with in the Swiss Alps at the time. Yeah? Which is to say, again, that asana has always been in evolution. It's never been a static thing. You could say, well, this is what asana means, and this is what yoga means. Yeah? And I think that's beautiful, because it liberates the individual to say, well, you don't have to necessarily look back and get it right to a 2,000-year-old text. Maybe, if you just do asana now, you can have an experience of your own body which is valid and perhaps doesn't necessarily need that much more context around it. Given that religion in the first place contextualizes a practical experience of a practice, right? You have a practice, you do a practice, a ritual, yeah. Practice meaning a ritual, something which you know from the start, middle and end, has a certain format, a pre-existent format. And you do that practice and you have a personal experience. And then religion offers a dogma, teaching around that experience to contextualize it. And the same as yoga. We have a certain context around our practical experience of yoga, right? The teacher tells us that yoga means this, this, this. We have an experience of our asanas, and then the teacher comes and says, well, this is how you should relate to that experience. Well, I'm saying that that's a fluid message. I'm saying that always is a shifting sands, that our practical experience of embodiment Yes, it does matter how we contextualize it because we are living in different societies, but it's also a personal matter. Anyway, how do we get onto that? With B.K.S, Iyengar and Patabi Joyce being taught by Krishnamacharya at the Mysore Palace. And so Krishnamacharya teaches this asana system, shorn of any religion, shorn of any cultural context. There's no meditation. There's no talk of even pranayama, I believe. Yeah. On the other hand, we find his book, Krishnamacharya's book at the time, the Yoga Makaranda, where he does talk of all these things. He does mention, in a very kind of comprehensive terms, that asana could be used in terms of Patanjali's ladder, that you do asana to ascend the ladder to pranayama and dharana and dhyana samadhi, or he mentions asana in the model of the tantrics, that you use the body to work with the energy, align the energy through the central channel. Yeah, he mentions that model. He even, Krishnamacharya in his Makaranda, mentions the Ayurvedic model of asana, which has always been there. I believe the Charaka Samhita, probably the oldest text to use yoga asana that's written down, which is pre-Patanjali, pre-modern era. And they use asana therapeutically in the Ayurvedic context, right? You do asana to rectify health complaints in the body. Yeah, so Krishnamacharya is using all these uses of asanas, and he explains it quite comprehensively in what he's promoting there at the palace at the time. But the boys don't obviously have any part of that. They're just taught the asana in and of itself. And then the book suggests another approach. So that, to me, is the clue or the way in that always not meets the eye. That Krishnamacharya, whether he's teaching an asana shorn of any other context around it or not, and he was, for sure, whether he really believes that. See, when Krishnamacharya leaves the Mysore Palace, of course, he goes off to Chennai to teach with his son TKV Desikachar at his ashram there. It's not an ashram, but a centre in Chennai. And he teaches for most of his life. And of course, he does contextualise asana again. He puts all the normal trappings around asana: chanting, textual studies, meditation, pranayama, emphasis on yama, niyama. So everything is back around asana. So it's only for this short period, really, that the figures like Krishnamacharya do seem to teach asana as an independent practice. And of course, Krishnamacharya has his reasons at the Mysore Palace because, well, essentially, it's a yoga performance he's asked to stage by the Maharaj of Mysore. A yoga performance for certain political reasons, I believe. And of course, we can't know for sure, but I believe that at that point, as it is now, yoga is a symbol. Is yoga asana is being used as a symbol. And it's a symbol of modern Hinduism, basically. It's a symbol of a tradition, of something very traditional, something very specific to Hinduism, and something strong and dynamic. And if you look at the time period when Krishnamacharya is teaching, it would be hard not to think that what he was teaching wouldn't be political. Looking at the turmoil of that time period, the attempts at Indian independence going on at that time, pretty much they were pushing against an open door. Britain was certainly going to leave from the 1930s onwards. I think that was being potentially made very clear. And so there's just the question then of working out what modern India was going to be. Was it going to be a mix of Muslim or Hindus? Was it going to be Hindu? Certainly probably wasn't going to be Muslim. So I hesitate to say, but the Maharaj of Mysore, being powerful and being Hindu, probably was using asana as a symbol, really, of modern Hinduism, just like Modi is right now. This is something which is time old. It's ours. It traces its background to the origins of the country, to these early seals of yoga postures, and we are the people that are the inheritors of the country. And not only that, we are strong and dynamic. Look at these asanas; they're strong and dynamic, and they showcase this kind of new, young, modern Hindu people, and that's at least the idea. And, nothing new there. As I say, asana has been used by the Indian government now for these auspices for a long time. So Krishnamacharya, I believe, is somewhat involved in this game. Of course, he's not teaching exactly how he would like to teach. His book written at the time, certainly does not have an asana practice shorn of any other are the context around it. Yeah, we find a fully fledged picture of the whole gamut of yoga in the Makaranda. Yeah. What we do find also, though, in Krishnamacharya's Yoga Makaranda is quite a strong tirade against the British at the start, so it's already quite a political framed book. Yeah. So where do we go from here? Well, the fact is that the asanas were performative because obviously a symbol needs to be visual, needs to be strong, needs to be captivating. So Krishnamacharya's asanas couldn't be just like, well, yoga is about meditation, so get the boys to sit down in meditation and perform a few simple stretches. Of course not. He had to provide something which was really striking and also something modern. Remember, there was this strong backlash of modern Hindus at the time to do with the traditional kind of how would I say, pacifistic ideas of Hinduism. That it had got them into that predicament in the first place. That the over kind of, let's say, fatalist approach to life. That this kind of, well, just ahimsa, based on ahimsa, had allowed the British to walk in there and colonise them. So there was a need for, among a kind of what's called a muscular Hinduism, a strong muscular Hinduism that said, look, we won't put up with this. We know what we are and we know what we want, and it's our country, and out you go, right? So it was also important that yoga was traditional, but also very, very strong and dynamic as well. And so Krishnamacharya's asana at the time, being a performative, spectacular, was perfect to fit this bill. I mean, and well, no coincidence there, because that was his task, I believe, his main task. And again, it's conjecture, and again, you may well disagree, and I'm not putting it out there as a statement of fact at all. I'm just conjecturing around the formation of this short period of time where asana is taught alone. And why? Because for the rest of his time, Krishnamacharya certainly never taught asana alone. And it's a unique innovation, considering that he is a very traditional Brahmin in the first place. Krishnamacharya was not only a traditional Brahmin, but potentially the inheritor of a title for the leadership of a prestigious monastery in Mysore. So he wasn't any old religious figure, but quite a esteemed. I mean, very high up. In terms of his position on the religious ladder, as it were. So why is he suddenly presenting this newfangled, innovative system of asana? It seems a little strange. And of course, again, he doesn't, when he goes on to teach on his own, he does present a fully fledged context around it, which I'm not saying is necessary as well, because I've already said that the idea of the asana shorn of any of its trappings, that you can just go and do a yoga class and move and breathe and don't have to take any dogma, don't have to do any other practices that might suggest a different cultural context or might be more difficult to grasp. That's the reason for asana's popularity, of course. And anyone who's experienced an asana class, when you first went in, you probably didn't know anything about the context, and you had a deep experience of yourself. So we don't necessarily need to judge modern yoga badly, because it is modern postural yoga. So I wanted to say about the performative aspect of Krishnamacharya, because, well, now, I mean, he was the most influential, as I said before. He was the most influential of the three musketeers, or the three horsemen. That was what I was going to say, the three horsemen of the modern yoga asana, being Kaivalyananda, Sri Iyengar and Krishnamacharya. And of course there are others as well, obviously. Ghosh, Bikram's teacher, Vishnu Ghosh, was also there as a using asana in where was he now? He was in Kolkata. So there were others. It wasn't just those three, but they were the main three. And and T. Krishnamacharya stands out because he presents this asana that is then taken on by two main disciples. Main because they became popular, not because they were the most important necessarily, but Patabi Joyce and B.K.S. Iyengar. And what they do is they take the performative aspect of Krishnamacharya's asana. Yeah? They take the performative aspect, because they were yoga performances after all, and they make a practice out of these. Because, and it's a subtle point again, I don't believe that the boys of the Krishnamacharya's palace, not Krishnamacharya's palace, the Maharaja of Mysore's palace, I don't believe that those boys were doing a practice of asana. They were learning asanas to do these yoga performances. So what they did with Krishnamacharya were essentially dress rehearsals, really, for the performance. They weren't practicing yoga, I don't think, for the sake of yoga, if you see what I mean. They weren't doing it for the sake of itself. They were learning spectacular asanas to perform in front of a public. So it wasn't the same thing. But what Krishnamacharya then went on to do, of course, was to teach yoga more thoroughly, but he didn't then. But B.K.S. Iyengar and Patabi Joyce, what they did, learning with Krishnamacharya at that time, was take these performative asanas and make a practice out of them. So they taught their students, this is B.K.S. Iyengar and Patabi Joyce, they taught their students a practice of asana, not a performance. And then the practice of asana became a thing in itself. Do you see the difference? It's a subtle point, but I think an important point. So I don't think Krishnamacharya was ever teaching asana as a practice, really. But certainly B.K.S. Iyengar and Patabi Joyce were. And they authenticated this move in a number of ways. I mean, B.K.S. Iyengar said alignment, famously, alignment is enlightenment. That the idea of the asanas themselves, when you got them perfectly aligned in your own to do with your own body patterns somewhat, and to do with, well, literally, I think with B.K.S. it was quite straight lines really. But anyways, when you align your asanas, then your mind settles down and you're naturally in a meditation state. That was, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the long and short of B.K.S.'s ideas towards asana. That is, if the body perfectly aligns, the mind drops into silence, and you experience the true nature of the mind. That kind of thing, right? So again, it's a synthesis of all things happening at the same time. The breathing becomes correct, the body becomes correct. And I suppose, if we treat it further, that the yamas and niyamas are also naturally fulfilled when the mind experiences its own self. Anyway, so the asana is the linchpin again with B.K.S.'s teaching, and same with Patabi Joyce, who suggested with his sweating that the body would heat, the body should be heated. In his early days particularly, Patabi Joyce talked a lot more about heating the body, or blood boiling, he used to say. And he used to say, heating body, purifying, mind purifying, purification is what he said. He's a bit like a politician, isn't he? And this is through the sweating and the heating of the body and the blood in the body. So again, we have this transformation of the performative aspect that Krishnamacharya taught for very specific political reasons, I'm suggesting, to the use of yoga asana as a physical practice with higher reaching aims that was then kind of carried on by Patabi Joyce and B.K.S. Iyengar. So it's like turns of the wheel, and none of them are more false or more true. They're just different iterations or different ways to present accessible yoga practice, in a sense, or different usages. Of course, Krishnamacharya had a certain usage that he demanded out of yoga at the time, as B.K.S. and Patabi Joyce, in conjunction with their students, I'm sure, understood that there was a certain body interest, and so they taught the body interest of their clientele, of their students. So therefore, to that end, we find asana used now as somewhat as a modern fitness practice. People don't do any other movement oftentimes, right? They don't do the gym, they don't do running or cycling or anything else, just yoga postures. And I did for many years myself as my full movement practice, as an exercise practice with other intentions at the same time. So that the idea that you could do physical therapy, somewhat take care of your physical health, as well as do everything else within the context of asana. So this is to talk of a modern embodied practice, that there's a sense of embodying yourself, or there's a sense of working more with your energy of your body in a tantric sense. Tantrism defined by a certain interest in aligning the energy of the body, or heightening the energy of the body through aligning it, or using the asanas to meditate. Many people say to me quite often, well, yoga is simply Patanjali's Chitta Vritti Nirodha. That's what yoga is, and that's what we're doing. I say I beg to differ. It's a long way round jumping on a mat for an hour and a half to stilling the mind. I think there's quicker ways to stilling the mind than just jumping on the mat. I do think it's more more of an embodiment practice, perhaps more of an alignment of energy practice. But nevertheless, we see that now what I'm kind of rambling onto, or what I'm circumambulating here, is we see asana opening out again to being taken in somewhat of a open format, right? What is it now, right? And we saw Krishnamacharya take on traditional texts at the time. He used traditional texts in the Mysore Palace. He probably used some ideas from movement systems that surrounded him, yeah? And he came up with this very captivating new asana practice for political intents, I think, for the Maharaj of Mysore. And then, well, his disciples, his foremost disciples, we don't include TKV Desikachar in this, probably because Desikachar taught like Krishnamacharya later taught. So, ironically, the tradition of Krishnamacharya actually isn't his tradition at all. Because, well, his true tradition is probably carried on by TKV Desikachar and a more moderate approach to asana. But of course, the legacy or tradition is always talked about as those few years in the Mysore Palace, which are really most unrepresentative of Krishnamacharya's tradition. If we look at his whole teaching career and how many years he allotted to the palace, or how many years he allotted to his actual teaching in Chennai, nevertheless, that legacy or tradition tends to be thought to be carried over in the persons of Patabi Joyce and B.K.S. Iyengar, not TKV Desikachar, his son, and then we get this other turn of the wheel where the performative asanas are then linked back to yoga philosophy again in their own way. Patabi Joyce, B.K.S. Iyengar, having no philosophical training from Krishnamacharya, then inherit somewhat of a tabula rasa, like a blank slate. They can now interpret what they're doing in their own sense. And as I mentioned, B.K.S. Iyengar turns to ideas from Krishnamurti and other ideas from other aspects of yoga. Patanjali greatly inspires B.K.S. and Patabi Joyce less so, I think, with Patanjali. Patabi Joyce with the tantric models of using hatha yoga. I felt definitely in his early teaching he was particularly interested in this more tantric model of using the body to change the mind through this heating and stimulating of the nerves of the spine in the more traditional version of hatha yoga, we find in the early tantric texts. Anyway, that's a short whip through of modern yoga and why it is modern, and why at the same time, yes, it's a new thing, but of course it has its roots in a very old thing. It's new and old. It's a presentation that's democratic, that's easily accessible now. Is it the whole thing? Does it stand for all of yoga? Well, of course it doesn't. But then no yoga practice ever stood for all of yoga. When we look at yoga, really what we're looking at is a diverse body of ideas happen to be located in a certain geographical landscape, right? Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and certain parts of Kashmir, Nepal, I think. And that from there, and Tibet. And from there comes all these diverse teachings, but they don't necessarily link together as one thing. They're all different schools. So in the first place, when we talk of yoga asana, as I said in the start of the podcast, we're not doing energy work and meditation and therapy and penance all at the same time. Say the four uses of asana being penance, energy work, therapy and meditation. Yeah. We're not doing them all at the same time. There's different schools of asanas. There are different uses, different perspectives on asana. So we've got all these diverse traditions suggesting different things. And now we just find another turn of the wheel where we find the performative of Krishnamacharya being added in. And then, well, somewhat we're still doing performative now perhaps, but then it being converted to a physical practice that people do, a practice of yoga, a ritual practice, yeah. So having a start, middle and end makes it a ritual, a certain meditation ritual really, as all rituals end up being, a certain way to turn inside. So the physical practice of asana becomes certainly a meditation ritual with the added bonus of a physical workout, basically, a physical exercise routine. Yeah? But it doesn't make it wrong, it just makes it one other aspect of yoga. And of course, the wheel of yoga has always been turning. It's never been one thing. It's always been a bit of a moving target. And I think that, to come back to my point about why I wanted to do this in the first place, there is this narrative that always somewhat frustrates me, that yoga is always been just this one thing, and that you must do it this way, and that Krishnamacharya was said it was like this, so this is how you're meant to do it if you're an authentic student. But I say no, I don't think that Krishnamacharya, Krishnamacharya is teaching varied greatly, just in the 2 periods within the Mysore Palace and outside the Mysore Palace that I've been talking about. Yeah. And then within the Mysore Palace, what he was doing was very highly influenced by political influences in the first place, as much as it was also based on certain scriptural ideas of the use of asana and vinyasa. It was also influenced from the outside. So to say that, to be a proper yoga student, you have to toe this line, that you might not have the authority, that you might not have the capacity to have a valid, personal, direct experience of your own consciousness through the simple movement of your body, I think is a fallacy. I think without any necessary context, and this is a supposition, and you may differ in your opinion, but I think without any further necessary context, we could potentially get on the mat within a quiet space, turn within, do the energetic postures, focusing on the mind, the breath, very minutely, and come to the very same experience that you would do if you had the whole context of yoga surrounding everything you do. You see what I mean? Yeah. Anyway, I hope you somewhat enjoyed this little rant, and apologies if anything is not quite as exact or correct as you might like it to be. I do my best, of course, with the information I have, and always feel free to comment or to correct or to, as is the modern way, or to add anything that you might feel relevant. I hope that I haven't spoken out of turn and that you've enjoyed it. Anyway, other than that, what am I doing? Well, after this great experience in Sarajevo that I'm about to have with a workshop here, I'll be on to Athens, and then of course Purple Valley, Goa. I'm always looking forward to returning to India, and then Malaga at Christmas. If you're not doing anything at Christmas, then why don't come to Malaga and join us at a beautiful kind of farmhouse slightly outside Malaga. There's a lovely space in the hills, but close to the town as well. We've got a great team, great food. I'll be doing some asanas, of course, but also talking like this, doing some meditation and other stuff like that, and yoga philosophy. And we had a great time last year. I'm sure we're on for a great time this year. And the group is really always cool. I always seem to attract an array of people that are really nice, open and friendly and warm. So you'll always be welcome. Yeah, and maybe come and check that one out. Anyways, see you next week with another guest. I hope you have a great week. And bye for now.